The Secret Life of Dean Martin. A Christmas story Hollywood never wanted you to know. For 8 years, Dean Martin lived a double life. Not on screen. Not in movies. Not in the carefully staged world of television. In the real world. Every Christmas Eve without fail, Dean Martin told the same lie. A harmless one. A believable one. I've got something to take care of tonight. His family never questioned it. Why would they? This was Dean Martin. The man whose name alone meant late nights, champagne, laughter, women, music, and excess. The man whose reputation was so firmly cemented that no explanation was ever required. They assumed parties. They assumed glamorous chaos. They assumed exactly what Dean wanted them to assume. Because Dean Martin wasn't going to a party. He was driving into the darkest parts of Los Angeles. Into neighborhoods tourists never saw. Into places where fame meant nothing and money didn't matter. He was going somewhere nobody would ever expect to find him. A homeless shelter. And for 8 years, nobody knew. The man America thought it knew. In 1972, Dean Martin wasn't just famous. He was an institution. To Americans, Dean Martin represented a fantasy, effortless cool, eternal charm, and a life untouched by consequences. He seemed to float above reality, immune to seriousness, untouched by guilt or responsibility. He laughed easily. He sang smoothly. He made everything look easy. The Dean Martin Show dominated television. Week after week, more than 20 million people tuned in to watch him croon beside beautiful women, crack jokes about drinking, and glide through life as if nothing truly mattered. Dean played the role perfectly. The slightly drunk entertainer. The carefree bachelor. The man who lived only for pleasure. And America loved him for it. The tabloids fed the image relentlessly. Nightclubs, casinos, Hollywood parties, Dean Martin with another actress, Dean Martin with another model. And Dean never corrected them. He never explained himself. Because the image protected him. It gave him privacy. And it gave him freedom. But behind the image was a man carrying something far heavier than anyone realized. Christmas Eve, 1972. By Christmas 1972, Dean Martin was 55 years old. Twice divorced. Living alone in a massive Beverly Hills mansion. Surrounded by luxury, but increasingly isolated. There was no wife waiting for him at home. No girlfriend expecting him at a party. To the public, he was Hollywood's most eligible bachelor. To himself, he was a man reflecting quietly on time. The Los Angeles Times ran a glossy holiday feature that week speculating about Dean's Christmas plans. Champagne, women, exclusive parties. It all sounded right. But it was all wrong. Because on Christmas Eve, Dean Martin did exactly what he'd done for the previous 8 years. He told his family he had something to do. Then he got into his car. Alone. And drove downtown. Where the secret began. The story didn't start in 1972. It started 8 years earlier. In December 1964. Dean Martin wasn't home often. His career kept him moving constantly, filming, touring, television, Vegas. But that December evening he was home. And his 13-year-old son, Dean Paul Martin Dino, approached him. "Dad," he said, "what are you doing on Christmas Eve?" Dean barely looked up. Not sure yet why. Dino hesitated, then explained. His school was organizing volunteers to serve dinner at a homeless shelter, St. Vincent's, in downtown Los Angeles. Dino had signed up. "I thought maybe you could come with me." Dean's instinct was immediate. No. A homeless shelter wasn't his world. It wasn't his environment. it wasn't his image. But then he looked at his son. Really looked at him. Dino wasn't asking for a favor. He was asking for time. For presence. For his father. And something inside Dean shifted. "Yeah," he said, "okay, I'll come." The night that changed him. December 24th, 1964. Dean and Dino drove together into downtown Los Angeles. As they moved farther from Beverly Hills, the city changed. The streets grew darker. The buildings older. The faces harder. Dean hadn't been here in years. St. Vincent's shelter wasn't pretty. It was a converted warehouse, worn, crowded, functional. Long tables lined the room. Volunteers worked quickly. Outside, hundreds of people waited in the cold. These weren't stereotypes. They were veterans. Elderly men. Women down on their luck. People life had simply passed by. Dean and Dinah worked for 4 hours. They set up tables. They served food. They talked. And then Dean met William. William was in his late 60s, a World War II veteran. He had served his country, survived the war, and somehow ended up forgotten. Dean handed him a plate of mashed potatoes. They talked briefly, about the war, about Christmas, about life. As William walked away, he turned back. "Thank you, sir," he said. "You just made my Christmas." Those words didn't leave Dean's mind. Because William wasn't thanking him for fame, or money, or generosity. He was thanking him for attention, for dignity, for being seen. That night, Dean didn't joke. He didn't speak much. On the drive home, Dino asked, "Dad, you okay?" Dean nodded. "Yeah, just thinking." But he didn't sleep. A decision made in silence. That night, Dean Martin lay awake in his mansion. He thought about William, about the others, about how small the gesture had been, a plate of food, a few minutes of conversation. Dean had everything. Money, power, status. And these people had nothing. But they weren't asking for his wealth. They were asking to matter. Before dawn, Dean made a quiet promise to himself. "I'm coming back." The first secret Christmas. Christmas Eve, 1965. Dean told his family he had something to do. They assumed a party. Instead, he drove downtown alone. This time, he wore a baseball cap and sunglasses. Not because he was hiding, but because he didn't want attention. He didn't want applause. He didn't want headlines. He didn't want praise. He wanted the work to be honest. He served food for 4 hours. He spoke to people. He cleaned up. Then he left. And told no one. 8 years of silence. Every Christmas Eve, the same ritual. Dean Martin disappeared. Friends assumed women. Family assumed parties. No one questioned it. At St. Vincent's, the volunteers knew him as Dan. Quiet, polite, reliable. He never talked about himself. He never posed for photos. He just showed up, worked, and left. For 8 years, the secret held. Until a young reporter walked through the door. The reporter who, NOTICD. Michael Sanders was 26 years old. A junior reporter. Assigned to work Christmas Eve while everyone else went home. His editor gave him a list: shelters, charities, feel-good stories. 500 words. Nothing special. St. Vincent's was his first stop. As he worked the room, something caught his attention. A volunteer serving mashed potatoes. Wearing sunglasses. Indoors. Michael's instincts flared. Then the man laughed. And Michael froze. He knew that laugh. He'd heard it his entire life. He stepped closer, and there it was. Dean Martin. The secret ends. Mr. Martin. Dean froze. For a moment time stopped. Then Dean turned, saw the press badge and understood. "Yeah," he said quietly, "that's me." "What are you doing here?" Dean looked at the line. "Serving dinner." Michael asked questions. Dean asked for silence. And then finally he explained. His father. The shelter. The lesson. We got enough, these people don't, so we help. The story that changed everything. The article ran December 27th, 1972. Front page. The Secret Life of Dean Martin. America was stunned. Letters poured in. Donations flooded the shelter. Other celebrities followed, quietly, respectfully. Dean never took credit. "I just served potatoes." The last Christmas. Dean volunteered every Christmas Eve until 1994. His final year. He was 77. Weak, but present. Dean Martin died Christmas Day, 1995. At his funeral, the shelter director spoke of Dan, the volunteer who never wanted credit. The real Dean Martin. The lesson isn't about fame. It's about humility. About doing good when no one is watching. That was Dean Martin's real legacy. He thought about William, about the others he'd met, about how little it took to change someone's day, a plate of food, a kind word, being seen. Dean had everything: money, fame, success. They had nothing. And they weren't asking for millions. They just wanted dignity. That night, Dean made a decision. "I'm coming back next year." Christmas Eve, 1965. Dean told his family he had something to take care of. They assumed a party. Instead, Dean drove to St. Vincent, alone. He wore a baseball cap and sunglasses, not to hide, but because he didn't want attention. No photographers, no publicity. He served food for 4 hours, talked to people, helped clean up. Then he left. And told no one. Christmas Eve, 1966. Same thing. Again. Again. Every single year. His family assumed parties. His friends assumed women. No one questioned it. Because Dean Martin was Dean Martin. But Dean wasn't partying. He was serving mashed potatoes at a homeless shelter. The volunteers at St. Vincent's knew him only as Dan. Quiet, polite, hard-working, always wearing a cap and sunglasses. They had no idea who he really was. Until Christmas Eve, 1972. That night, a 26-year-old junior reporter named Michael Sanders arrived at St. Vincent. He'd been assigned a routine holiday piece, human interest stories, feel-good quotes, 500 words due by midnight. As Michael worked the room, he noticed something strange. One volunteer was serving mashed potatoes indoors, wearing sunglasses. Michael moved closer, watched the way the man spoke, the way he moved. Then he laughed. A very familiar laugh. Michael froze. He knew that laugh. He'd heard it 1,000 times. Michael stepped closer, studied the face beneath the cap. It was Dean Martin. Michael approached and said quietly, "Mr. Martin." Dean froze. Slowly he turned, saw the press badge and understood. "Yeah," Dean said softly, "that's me." Stunned, Michael asked, "What are you doing here?" Dean gestured to the line. "Serving dinner, same as everyone else." Michael pulled out his notepad. Dean shook his head. "I'd rather you didn't write about this." Michael asked why. Dean sighed. "I've been coming here 8 years. I wanted it that way. This isn't about publicity. It's not a photo op. I just serve food and go home." Michael hesitated. Then Dean explained. My father was a barber in Steubenville, Ohio, immigrant, hard worker. When I was 7, he took me to a shelter on Christmas Eve and made me serve food. I didn't want to, I wanted presents. But my father said, "Dino, we got enough. These people don't, so we help." I never forgot that. Dean looked at Michael. "I don't do this for credit. The moment it becomes about me, it stops being about helping." Michael proposed a compromise, publish the story after Christmas, and make it about the shelter, not Dean. Dean agreed. The article ran on December 27, 1972. Front page: The Secret Life of Dean Martin, 8 Years of Anonymous Charity. The response was overwhelming. Letters poured in, donations flooded St. Vincent, volunteers multiplied. Dean never gave interviews. When asked, he said only, "I just serve potatoes." Dean continued volunteering every Christmas Eve until 1994. His final year. He was 77, sick, weak. But he showed up. Dean Martin died on Christmas Day, 1995. At his funeral, the director of St. Vincent spoke of a man named Dan, the volunteer who came every Christmas, never seeking credit. The lesson of Dean Martin's secret isn't about fame. It's about humility. About doing good when no one is watching. We got enough, these people don't, so we help. That was his father's lesson. And Dean Martin lived it quietly for 30 years. That's who he really was.